My name is Margaret Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never imagined my only son would throw $50 in my face during Christmas dinner. After decades of sacrifice as a single mother, working multiple jobs and going without so Timothy could have everything, his words cut deeper than any knife. Go make your own money, quit leeching off me. The room fell silent. My world shattered. But karma has a way of serving justice when you least expect it. Before I continue my story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments if you have ever been taken for granted by someone you sacrificed everything for. I was born in a small town just outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. My parents were hardworking people who never had much, but they made sure I understood the value of education. From an early age, I dreamed of becoming a teacher. I loved the idea of shaping young minds and making a difference in children's lives. When I graduated high school in 1974, I was the first person in my family to attend college. It was during my sophomore year at the University of Minnesota that I met Richard. He was studying business administration and had this charismatic smile that could light up a room. We bumped into each other at the campus library, both reaching for the same economics textbook. He asked me to coffee, and before I knew it, we were inseparable. Richard was ambitious and spoke about starting his own business someday. I was captivated by his dreams and confidence. After dating for 2 years, we got married in a small ceremony when I was 22. My parents worried it was too soon, but I was certain Richard was my soulmate. 2 years into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant with Timothy. Richard seemed happy about the news, buying a little blue teddy bear the day we found out. Those first few months of pregnancy were blissful as we prepared for our baby boy. But something changed during my second trimester. Richard started coming home later and later from work. He became irritable and controlling, questioning my every purchase and decision. He complained about the nursery costs and how children were financial burdens. The warm, loving man I married was disappearing before my eyes. By the time Timothy was born, Richard barely participated in caring for him. He would criticize how I held the baby or claim Timothy cried too much. When I tried talking to him about his behavior, he would twist my words and make me feel like I was being irrational. The emotional abuse escalated gradually, like a pot of water slowly coming to boil. The day everything changed forever started like any other. Timothy was 2 years old, playing with his blocks on the living room floor. I was preparing dinner when Richard came home, packed a suitcase, and announced he was leaving. He claimed he never wanted the responsibility of a family and had met someone else, someone without baggage. He left his wedding ring on the kitchen counter and walked out, leaving only a check that barely covered 2 months of rent. The shock was indescribable. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor after Timothy went to sleep, wondering how I would possibly manage on my own. I had put my education on hold during my pregnancy, just 2 semesters short of my teaching degree. Now I was a single mother with limited job prospects and no support system in the city. The first year alone was the hardest. I immediately took a job as a receptionist at a local hospital, working the day shift while a neighbor watched Timothy. In the evenings, I waitressed at a diner 3 blocks from our apartment, taking Timothy with me when I couldn't find childcare. The manager was understanding enough to let him sleep in a makeshift bed in the break room. We had to move from our modest 2-bedroom apartment to a tiny 1-bedroom unit in a less desirable part of town. I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room so Timothy could have the bedroom. Every penny was accounted for, every expense scrutinized. There were many nights I would skip dinner, telling Timothy I had eaten earlier, just so he could have a proper meal. Richard's child support checks were inconsistent at best, non-existent at worst. He eventually moved to California, started a new family, and became a ghost in Timothy's life, sending the occasional birthday card with $20 tucked inside. Timothy would ask about his father, and I always tried to be honest without bitterness. Your daddy loves you in his way, but some people aren't ready to be parents, I would say, even though inside I was furious at Richard's abandonment. My own dreams of becoming a teacher faded into the background as survival became my priority. There was no time or money for finishing my degree. Instead, I learned to be resourceful. I became an expert at stretching a dollar, finding free community activities for Timothy, and creating magical childhood moments from very little. Despite everything, watching Timothy grow brought me immeasurable joy. His first words, first steps, first day of school. Each milestone was a reminder that all my sacrifices were worthwhile. He was my entire world, and I was determined to give him the opportunities one never had. Raising Timothy alone meant that every decision, every struggle, and every triumph fell squarely on my shoulders. My days started at 5 in the morning, preparing Timothy's lunch before dropping him at a neighbor's home by 6:30, so I could make it to my hospital receptionist job by 7. After finishing my shift at 3, I would have exactly 45 minutes to pick Timothy up, get him a snack, and drop him at the community after-school program before rushing to my waitressing job from 4 to 10. The hospital job covered our rent and utilities, while my waitressing tips paid for food, clothing, and tried to build a small education fund for Timothy. Some weeks, when tips were low or Timothy needed new shoes, I would pawn my mother's pearl necklace, the only valuable item I owned, only to save up and reclaim it months later. Our meals were simple but nutritious. I became an expert at making beans and rice seem exciting by adding different spices. Timothy never complained, though I knew he noticed when his friends had store-bought cookies in their lunches while he had homemade ones. "Your cookies are better anyway, Mom," he would say, and my heart would swell with love for this kind child. I learned to sew out of necessity, extending the life of Timothy's clothes by patching knees and letting down hems. My own wardrobe consisted of 3 work outfits that I rotated religiously, washing them by hand to make them last longer. I remember once overhearing a woman at the hospital comment on how I wore the same outdated blouse every Monday, and fighting back tears as I smiled and filed her paperwork. Despite our financial struggles, I was determined that Timothy would get a good education. I researched the best public schools in our area and volunteered at his school whenever I could trade a shift, believing that my presence would show his teachers how committed I was to his education. On Sundays, our only full day together, we would visit the public library where Timothy could explore books and I could help him with homework. As Timothy grew older, his intelligence and drive became apparent. He had his father's ambition, but I like to think my compassion. By middle school, he was getting straight A's and talking about business concepts that went over my head. I was immensely proud watching him excel, knowing how hard I had worked to create stability in his life. Around this time, my body began showing signs of the toll my lifestyle was taking. Chronic back pain from years of waitressing, migraines from stress, and perpetual exhaustion became my constant companions. A doctor advised me to reduce my working hours, but that was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I took over-the-counter pain relievers and kept pushing forward, hiding my health issues from Timothy so he wouldn't worry. When Timothy was 14, he came home excited about a summer business program at the local community college. Cost $300, money we didn't have. That night, after he went to bed, I called the credit card company and increased my already substantial debt to make it happen. Seeing him thrive in that program, building a mock business plan that won first place, made every additional shift worth it. By his junior year of high school, Timothy was talking about attending business school. The brochures from universities he brought home made my heart sink. The tuition amounts more than I could ever hope to save. But I smiled and encouraged him, promising we would find a way. That way came in the form of a second mortgage on the small house I had managed to buy when Timothy was 12, a fixer-upper in a modest neighborhood that gave us our first yard. I also took out personal loans, depleted my minimal retirement savings, and applied for every scholarship opportunity we could find. The day Timothy received his acceptance letter to the State University's business program was one of the happiest of my life. He jumped around our small living room, whooping with joy, while I calculated how many extra shifts I would need to pick up. "We did it, Mom," he said, hugging me tightly. In that moment, his happiness was all that mattered. During his college years, I saw Timothy less and less. He was busy with classes, internships, and new friends from more affluent backgrounds. I sent care packages with homemade cookies and called every Sunday, treasuring his stories about professors and projects. When he needed extra money for books or a laptop, I found a way, often by taking on cleaning jobs on top of my regular work. My retirement plans disappeared entirely. The financial advisor at the hospital looked at me with pity when I asked about my options, explaining that with my limited savings and the loans for Timothy's education, I would likely need to work well into my 70s. I accepted this reality without complaint, believing that Timothy's success would be my reward. The day he graduated with honors in business administration, I sat in the audience wearing a new dress I had saved for months to buy, tears of pride streaming down my face. Timothy looked so handsome in his cap and gown, so full of promise. He was 22, the same age I was when I married his father, but with a world of opportunities ahead of him that I never had. "You did it," I whispered when I hugged him after the ceremony. "We did it, Mom," he corrected, and I believed our bond was unbreakable. Timothy's entry into the corporate world was nothing short of impressive. With his business degree and natural charisma, he landed a position at a prestigious marketing firm in the city. His starting salary was more than I had ever made in a year, and I could not have been prouder. He rented a sleek apartment downtown, a far cry from our humble home, and quickly adapted to his new professional lifestyle. During those first few months, Timothy would visit me for Sunday dinners, excitedly sharing stories about client meetings and office politics. He seemed grateful for everything I had done, even bringing me small gifts from his business trips, a coffee mug from Chicago or a keychain from New York. I displayed each one proudly, tangible proof that all my sacrifices had been worthwhile. It was at a company function that Timothy met Audrey Lancaster. She came from old money, her father being the CEO of a regional banking chain. With her designer clothes and finishing school manners, Audrey was everything I was not: sophisticated and polished. When Timothy first brought her to meet me, I noticed how she subtly surveyed my modest home, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Your mother is quaint," I overheard her tell Timothy on the porch as they were leaving. He didn't defend me, just chuckled uncomfortably and hurried her to his car. Their relationship progressed quickly. Within a year, Timothy proposed with a diamond ring that must have cost several months of his salary. The wedding was held at Audrey's parents' country club, an extravagant affair where I felt hopelessly out of place. Audrey's mother asked if I had considered wearing something more current than my best blue dress, the one I had carefully selected and altered for the occasion. After the wedding, Timothy and Audrey bought a house in Lakewood Heights, an exclusive neighborhood with manicured lawns and security gates. Their home was a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial with marble countertops and hardwood floors. During my first visit, I accidentally tracked mud onto their white carpet and spent the next hour trying to clean it while Audrey watched with thinly veiled annoyance. As Timothy climbed the corporate ladder, his visits became less frequent. Sunday dinners turned into monthly phone calls, which eventually became occasional texts. When we did speak, he seemed distracted, often cutting our conversation short for business calls or plans with Audrey. I told myself he was busy building his career, that this distance was normal and temporary. 3 years after joining the marketing firm, Timothy announced he was leaving to start his own company, a digital marketing agency targeting luxury brands. He spoke about venture capital and market disruption, terms that meant little to me but clearly excited him. Audrey's family connections helped secure initial investors, and before long, Apex Digital was born. The company took off faster than anyone anticipated. Within 2 years, Timothy had an office in a downtown high-rise and a staff of 30. His face appeared in business journals, hailed as an innovative entrepreneur reshaping the industry. I cut out every article and kept them in a scrapbook, though I noticed he rarely mentioned his background or me in interviews. With success came more changes in Timothy. His wardrobe evolved to exclusively designer labels. He traded his first luxury car for an even more expensive one. His speech became peppered with references to exclusive restaurants and vacation destinations I would never see. When he did visit me, which was now only on major holidays, he seemed uncomfortable, checking his phone constantly and making comments about my outdated furniture or inefficient kitchen appliances. "Mom, why don't you get rid of some of this stuff?" he asked during one visit, gesturing to my collection of ceramic birds, souvenirs from local craft fairs that had been my only indulgence over the years. "It makes the place look cluttered." I smiled and changed the subject, but the comment stung. My home might be simple, but it was filled with memories and items I cherished. Audrey's influence on Timothy became increasingly apparent. She came from a world where appearances were paramount, where people were judged by their addresses and affiliations, rather than their character. Timothy began adopting her views, becoming embarrassed by my simple ways and working-class mannerisms. When I was invited to their home for dinner parties, I was clearly an afterthought. Timothy would introduce me briefly to his colleagues and friends, then steer me toward a corner where I would sit quietly, nursing a glass of wine I didn't particularly enjoy. I overheard snippets of conversations about investment portfolios and vacation homes, topics that highlighted the growing chasm between Timothy's world and mine. "Your mother is so interesting," one of Audrey's friends commented once, with the same tone one might use to describe an unusual insect. "So provincial." Timothy laughed uncomfortably and quickly changed the subject. Despite these painful moments, I continued to make excuses for him. He was under pressure building his business. Audrey's expectations were demanding. He was adapting to a different social circle. I held on to memories of the grateful boy who once hugged me tightly after his college graduation, believing that son was still somewhere inside the man Timothy had become. As his success grew, so did his criticism of me. He began offering unsolicited financial advice, suggesting I had been foolish with money all these years, despite the fact that every financial decision I had made was for his benefit. He questioned why I still worked at the hospital, now part-time due to my arthritis, implying it was beneath his mother to work such a menial job. "Have you ever considered trying to better yourself, Mom?" he asked during one particularly hurtful conversation. "Taking some classes or something. You could do more than answer phones your whole life." He seemed to have forgotten, or chosen to ignore, that I had sacrificed my education and career aspirations so he could have his. That the reason I was still working at 67 was because I had emptied my retirement accounts for his college tuition. That the more I had wanted in life had been channeled entirely into giving him opportunities. Despite these painful interactions, I still looked forward to our holiday gatherings. Christmas had always been special for us, even during the leanest years when presents were homemade and our tree was small. I hoped the holiday spirit might soften the edges that success had hardened in my son, might remind him of the bond we once shared. That hope led me to Timothy and Audrey's front door last Christmas, arms loaded with carefully wrapped presents and homemade cookies, unaware that the evening would change our relationship forever. I spent weeks preparing for Christmas at Timothy and Audrey's home. Despite my limited budget, I wanted my gifts to be meaningful. For Audrey, I found a vintage silk scarf at a consignment shop that reminded me of ones her mother wore. For Timothy, I knitted a quilt incorporating fabric from his childhood, including pieces of his first baseball uniform and the blue blanket he had loved as a toddler. Each square represented a memory, a labor of love that took me 3 months to complete. I also baked Timothy's favorite cookies, ginger molasses that he had adored since childhood. During those difficult early years, these cookies had been our Christmas tradition, something special even when presents were few. I remembered how his eyes would light up when the aroma filled our tiny apartment. The day of Christmas Eve, I dressed in my best outfit, a forest green sweater with black slacks, and carefully applied makeup to cover the fatigue lines around my eyes. My arthritis was flaring up, making the drive to their suburban neighborhood painful, but I pushed through, excited to spend the holiday with my son. Timothy and Audrey's house was spectacular, decorated like something from a magazine. A 12-foot Christmas tree dominated their foyer, professionally decorated in silver and blue, not a single handmade ornament in sight. Wreaths with matching ribbons hung on every window, and the exterior was outlined with perfect white lights. It was beautiful but somehow cold, lacking the warmth of the modest decorations Timothy and I once created together. Audrey answered the door, her smile tight as she air-kissed my cheek. "Margaret, you made it." We were beginning to wonder. It was only 4:30, the exact time they had specified. Inside, the house bustled with activity. Caterers arranged appetizers in the kitchen, while a bartender set up in the corner of the living room. Audrey's parents were already there, along with what appeared to be business associates of Timothy's and their spouses, all dressed in elegant holiday attire that made my carefully selected outfit seem shabby by comparison. Timothy was on his phone when I entered, his back to me as he paced near the fireplace. When he finally noticed me, his greeting was distracted, a quick half-hug before he returned to his call. Market fluctuations wait for no man, not even on Christmas, he joked to the room. Several guests nodding in understanding. I placed my gifts under the tree and offered to help in the kitchen. A habit from years of making myself useful. Audrey quickly intercepted. The caterers have it under control, Margaret. Why don't you just sit down somewhere? Timothy will be with you shortly. I found a seat on the edge of a white sofa, balancing my plate of appetizers carefully to avoid spills. Audrey's mother, Elizabeth, joined me, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she sipped her wine. So, Margaret, are you still working at that hospital? At your age? The question carried judgment rather than interest. Yes, part-time now. I enjoy keeping busy, I replied, not mentioning that financial necessity was the true reason. Elizabeth nodded with the patronizing smile of someone who had never worked a day in her life. How industrious of you. Dinner was served at a table set for 16, with multiple courses and wine pairings. I sat at the far end, away from Timothy, who was engaged in animated conversation with what appeared to be potential investors. The discussion revolved around profit margins and market expansion, topics that excluded most of us. When the time came for gift exchanges, I watched nervously as Audrey unwrapped my present. Her expression remained neutral as she held up the vintage scarf. How unique. Thank you, Margaret. The scarf was quickly set aside for the next gift, an expensive handbag from her sister that elicited genuine excitement. Timothy opened his quilt last, barely glancing at the carefully stitched squares before thanking me absently. He folded it haphazardly and placed it behind the sofa, moving on to open gifts from Audrey's family, exclaiming enthusiastically over golf clubs and designer watches. Throughout dinner, I tried to participate in conversations, sharing a story about Timothy's childhood entrepreneurship, selling lemonade to save for a bicycle. Rather than laughing along, Timothy looked uncomfortable, quickly steering the conversation back to his recent business trip to Tokyo. As dessert was served, I reached for the serving spoon for the chocolate mousse, accidentally knocking over my wine glass. Red liquid spread across the white tablecloth, a crimson stain impossible to ignore. The table fell silent. I am so sorry, I gasped, dabbing at the spill with my napkin, only making it worse. Audrey's face tightened. Just leave it, Margaret. We will have it professionally cleaned. Mom, seriously? Timothy's voice was sharp with embarrassment. Can you try to be more careful? That tablecloth was from Italy. I felt my face burn with shame. I really am sorry, my arthritis makes my grip unstable sometimes. Your arthritis, your budget, your limitations, it is always something with you, Timothy muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. I sat frozen, hands trembling as a server hurried to clean the mess. The conversation awkwardly resumed around me, but I could feel eyes glancing my way, pitying or judging. After dessert, Timothy announced he had one more gift to give. He handed envelopes to his in-laws, business partners, and friends, explaining they contained exclusive passes to a luxury golf resort for a New Year's retreat. Only the best for the people who make Apex Digital's success possible, he declared, raising his glass in a toast. I watched, a hollow feeling growing in my chest, realizing I was the only person at the table not receiving an envelope. I told myself it was fine, that Timothy knew I wasn't interested in golf, that there would be another gift more suited to me. As guests began to disperse into the living room for after-dinner drinks, I approached Timothy near the bar. The dinner was lovely, I said, trying to reconnect. It reminds me of how we used to pretend to have fancy meals in our apartment, using paper towels as napkins. His expression darkened. Mom, please do not bring up that stuff here. That was a different time. I know, I just meant it is nice to see how far you have come, how successful you are now. Timothy glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Look, I have been meaning to talk to you. I think it might be better if we, limit these family gatherings to just major holidays. Audrey finds it stressful, and frankly, you do not really fit in with our social circle. The words hit me like physical blows. I do not fit in? I am your mother, Timothy. Yes, and I appreciate everything you did, but we are in different worlds now. You refuse to adapt, to update your appearance, or even try to relate to our lifestyle. I never had the luxury of focusing on appearances, Timothy. I was too busy making sure you had opportunities. His face flushed with irritation. Here we go again, the martyr routine. Do you know how uncomfortable it makes me when you constantly remind me of your sacrifices? It is manipulative, Mom. Manipulative? My voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. I have never asked you for anything in return. Really? Then why do you still work at that hospital instead of retiring like normal people your age? Why do you live in that outdated house? It is like you want to remind me constantly that you struggle, make me feel obligated. I work because I need to. I live where I live because it is what I can afford after spending everything on your education. My voice trembled with emotion. Timothy's expression shifted from irritation to anger. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and thrust $50 at me. The bills fluttered against my chest before falling to the floor between us. There. Go make your own money, quit leeching off me, he snapped, loud enough that conversations around us ceased. I am tired of the guilt trips about how hard you had it raising me alone. That was your choice after Dad left. The room fell silent. I could feel every eye on us, witnessing my humiliation. Audrey stood frozen by the fireplace, a mixture of embarrassment and vindication on her face. Her mother whispered something to her father, both looking at me with thinly veiled disdain. I bent slowly, my arthritic knees protesting, and picked up the money from the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grasp the bills. When I straightened, I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Timothy's face, and saw no remorse in his eyes, only irritation that I had created a scene at his perfect Christmas gathering. I have never asked you for money, I said quietly. And I never will again. I walked to the closet, retrieved my coat and gathered my purse. No one moved to stop me or speak as I headed for the door. Only Audrey's father, surprisingly, approached to awkwardly wish me a good night. The drive home was a blur, tears making the road lights smear into streams of color. Once inside my small house, the silence enveloped me. The contrast between the evening I had anticipated and the reality I had experienced was too much to process. I sat in my darkened living room, still wearing my coat, and allowed myself to fully feel the pain of Timothy's betrayal. In the days that followed, I moved through life mechanically. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, unable to face sympathetic questions about my holiday. I ignored the few messages on my phone, not ready to share my humiliation with friends. The leftover cookies I had brought home sat untouched on the counter, a painful reminder of broken traditions. 3 days after Christmas, a text message from Timothy appeared on my phone. Sorry things got heated. I was stressed about work. Let us move past this. No acknowledgement of the cruelty of his words, no real apology, just an expectation that I would forgive and forget as I always had. I did not respond. For the first time in my life, I could not make excuses for him or prioritize his feelings above my own. The pain was too raw, the disillusionment too complete. As the new year approached, I realized a lifetime of sacrifice had culminated in that moment, when my son threw money at me like I was a beggar rather than the woman who had given up everything for him. It was time to face a painful truth. The son I loved had become someone I no longer recognized, and no amount of maternal love could bridge that gap unless he chose to meet me halfway. The first 2 weeks of January passed in a fog of grief. I moved between my bed and sofa, replaying Timothy's words and actions, searching for where I had gone wrong as a mother. Had I given too much? Not enough. The questions circled endlessly, leaving me exhausted and heartbroken. It was Barbara, my friend from the hospital, who finally intervened. After I missed another shift, she appeared at my door with grocery bags and determination. Barbara had known me for 20 years, had witnessed my struggles raising Timothy alone, and was not about to let me sink into depression. You look terrible, she announced, pushing past me into the kitchen and unpacking soup containers and bread. Time to eat something that is not crackers and self-pity. As we sat at my small kitchen table, I finally shared the full story of Christmas Eve. Barbara listened without interruption, her expression darkening with each detail. When I finished, expecting sympathy, she surprised me with her response. Margaret, I love you dearly, but you have been a doormat for that boy for years. What? I was just being a good mother. There is a difference between loving your child and erasing yourself for them. You have spent decades believing your only value was in what you gave Timothy, and now you are surprised he sees you the same way, as nothing more than what you can give him. Her words stung, but somewhere deep inside I recognized their truth. I had defined myself solely as Timothy's mother for so long that I had forgotten who Margaret Wilson was, what she wanted, what brought her joy beyond her child's success. I do not know how to be anything else, I admitted quietly. Barbara reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Then it is time to find out. You are 68, not 98. Your life is not over unless you decide it is. That conversation marked the beginning of my transformation. Barbara helped me create small, manageable goals to rebuild my sense of self. The first was to return to work, not just for financial necessity but for social connection. My colleagues welcomed me back warmly, and focusing on helping patients gave me purpose beyond my personal pain. Barbara also insisted I join her at the Riverside Community Center, where they offered free classes for seniors. My first attempt was a computer skills course, something Timothy had often criticized me for lacking. I was terrified the first day, certain I would be the oldest, least capable person there. Instead, I found a classroom full of people my age, all nervous about technology but determined to learn. The instructor, Susan, was patient and encouraging. When I successfully created my first email account and sent a message, the sense of accomplishment was surprisingly powerful. It was a small step, but it was mine, something I had done for myself rather than for Timothy. Through the community center, I met Diane and Eleanor, two women close to my age who were also rebuilding their lives after major changes. Diane was a recent widow, while Eleanor had moved to be closer to grandchildren only to find her son's family too busy to include her regularly. Our shared experiences created an immediate bond, and soon we were meeting for coffee before classes, sharing stories and support. As winter turned to spring, I found myself looking forward to these new routines. My world, which had shrunk to work and home, began expanding again. Eleanor invited me to join a volunteer program teaching English to immigrant families. My old dream of becoming a teacher stirred to life as I helped mothers and children learn basic communication skills. Their gratitude and progress brought me joy I had not experienced in years. In April, Barbara connected me with her nephew Martin, a financial advisor who offered free consultations to seniors. I was embarrassed to reveal my precarious situation, a 68-year-old woman with minimal savings, still working part-time to make ends meet. But Martin was kind and practical, helping me create a realistic budget and exploring options I had not considered. Have you ever looked into whether you have any unclaimed assets or inheritances? He asked during our second meeting. Sometimes people are surprised. Following his suggestion, I investigated and discovered something unexpected. A small inheritance from my mother's sister, Aunt Judith, who had passed away years ago. I had lost touch with her after my mother died, and her attorney had been unable to locate me when she left me $5,000 in some jewelry. The money had been held in trust, accumulating modest interest for almost a decade. It was not a fortune, but it felt like one to me, an unexpected gift that offered choices I had not had before. After careful consideration and consultation with Martin, I decided to invest part of it and use another portion for something I had long abandoned, education. The local community college offered a certification program for teaching assistants that could be completed in 6 months. With my experience volunteering with the immigrant families, the admissions counselor thought I would be an excellent candidate. The program cost was significant for me, but manageable with my inheritance. Enrolling in the program at my age drew surprised looks from younger students, but their initial curiosity soon turned to respect when they saw my dedication. The coursework was challenging after decades away from formal education, but I approached it with determination, studying late into evenings after work and volunteer sessions. While these external changes were important, the internal transformation was even more significant. I began recognizing patterns in how I had related to Timothy, always prioritizing his needs and feelings above my own, making excuses for increasingly selfish behavior. Barbara's words about being a doormat echoed painfully but truthfully. With Diane and Eleanor's support, I started practicing small acts of self-respect, from buying a new outfit that made me feel confident to declining requests that were inconvenient. I redecorated my small living room with colorful pillows and framed photographs of places I hope to visit someday, creating a space that reflected my personality rather than just practicality. Timothy made several attempts to contact me during these months, text messages and voicemails that ranged from briefly apologetic to increasingly irritated by my lack of response. "Mom, you cannot ignore me forever. This silent treatment is childish," one message said, ironically accusing me of the immaturity he had displayed at Christmas. I was not ignoring him to punish him, but because I was not ready to re-engage without significant change on his part. Under Barbara's encouragement, I wrote Timothy a letter expressing my feelings about his behavior and our relationship, articulating boundaries I needed him to respect moving forward. I never mailed it, but the exercise helped clarify my thoughts and emotions. By summer, my life had taken on a new rhythm. Mornings at the hospital, afternoons in classes or volunteering, evenings with my new friends or studying. I joined a water aerobics class to help manage my arthritis, finding that regular movement eased my pain better than medication alone. My world, which had revolved entirely around Timothy and his needs for decades, now contained diverse relationships and activities that nourished me. The most surprising development came in August, when my teaching assistant certification program required an internship. The elementary school where I had been placed was impressed with my work and offered me a part-time paid position for the upcoming school year. At 68, I would finally be working in education, a modified version of the dream I had abandoned when Timothy was born. The salary was modest, but combined with my reduced hospital hours and careful budgeting, it meant I could be financially independent. There was tremendous satisfaction in earning my own money, in knowing I had created this opportunity through my own efforts rather than relying on Timothy's grudging assistance. One evening in early September, sitting on my small porch with a cup of tea, I realized I had not thought about Timothy's cruel words for several days. The pain had not disappeared, but it had dulled from a sharp stab to a dull ache. I was building a life that was mine, full of purpose and connection, regardless of whether my son chose to be part of it. I had set boundaries not out of anger but out of self-respect, and I was prepared to maintain them. Timothy would always be my son, and I would always love him, but our relationship could no longer be one-sided. If reconciliation came, it would need to be on terms that honored both of us, not just his convenience and comfort. As autumn approached, bringing with it memories of past holidays and family gatherings, I felt a strength I had not known I possessed. Whatever happened with Timothy, I would be okay. Margaret Wilson was more than just Timothy's mother, and it had taken his rejection for me to rediscover that fundamental truth. October arrived with brilliant foliage and crisp mornings. My life had settled into a satisfying routine, splitting time between the elementary school where I assisted in a second-grade classroom and reduced hours at the hospital. Weekends were filled with volunteer work, coffee with friends, and occasional community center events. I heard little from Timothy beyond perfunctory birthday wishes and the odd text message, which I answered politely but briefly. It was Diane who first brought me news about Timothy's company. Her son worked in finance and had mentioned troubles at Apex Digital during a family dinner. "Apparently there is some talk about financial irregularities," she said carefully over our Saturday morning coffee. "I thought you should know before you might hear it elsewhere." I thanked her but did not pursue details, uncomfortable with learning about my son's life through second-hand gossip. Whatever was happening with Timothy's business, he had chosen not to share it with me, another indication of the distance between us. A week later, Barbara arrived at my door clutching a business journal. "Have you seen this?" she asked, opening to an article headline Apex Digital under investigation. Rising Star or House of Cards? The article detailed allegations that Timothy's company had misrepresented client numbers and results to attract investors, with several major clients now filing lawsuits claiming fraudulent reporting. I read the article with growing dismay. There were quotes from former employees suggesting Timothy had pressured staff to falsify reports and cut corners on campaign deliverables. The journalist noted that several high-profile investors had already pulled funding, and Apex's stock value had dropped 60% in 2 weeks. "Oh, Timothy," I whispered, recognizing in the allegations the same pattern of shortcuts and image management that had characterized his personal relationships. He had always been focused on appearances, on projecting success rather than building it honestly. In the weeks that followed, more news emerged through Barbara and Diane's gentle updates. Timothy's company was imploding, with staff layoffs and office space reductions. A class action lawsuit had been filed by shareholders. There were rumors of a potential criminal investigation into financial reporting practices. I experienced conflicted emotions learning about Timothy's troubles. Part of me felt vindicated, that karma had indeed delivered consequences for his arrogance and cruelty. Another part, the mother who would always love her child regardless of his flaws, ached for his suffering and feared for his future. I did not reach out, believing Timothy needed to take responsibility for his actions without maternal rescue. If he wanted my support, he would need to ask for it honestly, not from a place of entitlement or manipulation. In late November, almost 11 months after the Christmas incident, my phone rang with Timothy's number just after 9 in the evening. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me sensed this call was different. "Hello, Timothy," I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom." His voice sounded rough, strained in a way I had not heard since he was a teenager dealing with school pressures. I was wondering if you might have time to meet for coffee this week." "I could do Thursday morning," I offered, fighting the urge to immediately ask what was wrong, to rush in with comfort as I always had. "Thursday works. Thank you." The formality between us was painful but necessary, a reflection of the broken trust that could not be instantly repaired. We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between our homes. When Thursday arrived, I dressed carefully in the burgundy sweater and black pants Eleanor had helped me select during a shopping trip, an outfit that made me feel confident and composed. The Timothy who waited at a corner table barely resembled the polished, arrogant man who had thrown money at me last Christmas. His expensive haircut had grown out unevenly, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his designer shirt looked rumpled, as if he had slept in it. Most striking was his expression, the carefully maintained mask of success replaced by naked vulnerability. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat across from him. "I was not sure you would." "I will always listen, Timothy. That has never changed." He stared into his coffee cup, struggling to begin. I waited patiently, resisting the lifelong habit of filling uncomfortable silences for him. "Everything is gone," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The company, the house, most of our savings. The lawsuits, the legal fees, it just keeps getting worse." "I had heard there were problems," I acknowledged. "Problems?" he repeated with a bitter laugh. "That is an understatement. I am facing potential criminal charges, Mom. Securities fraud. The board is trying to make me the scapegoat for practices that everyone approved when things were going well." I listened as he detailed the collapse of his business empire, how one questionable decision had led to another, each justified as necessary for maintaining the growth investors expected. He had believed his own hype, convinced that eventual success would erase any ethical shortcuts along the way. "And Audrey?" I asked when he paused. His face contorted with pain. "Left 2 weeks ago. Said she married a successful entrepreneur, not a potential convict. She is already seeing someone else, a friend of her father's who offered her a soft landing." My heart ached for him despite everything. "I am sorry, Timothy. Truly. The thing is," he continued, looking at me directly for the first time, "I keep thinking about what you said all those years about how money and status are not what matter in the end. I thought you just did not understand ambition, that you were satisfied with less because you did not know better. I was so arrogant. We all have lessons to learn," I said carefully, "some more expensive than others. I treated you terribly." His voice broke. "At Christmas, but before that too, for years. I was ashamed of where I came from, of your simple life, when I should have been proud of your strength and sacrifice." I took a deep breath, navigating between compassion and necessary honesty. "Yes, you did treat me terribly. That hurt has not disappeared because you are now in trouble, Timothy." He nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I know. I am not here asking for money or a place to stay or even forgiveness yet. I needed to see you to start by acknowledging how wrong I was." "Where are you staying now?" I asked, noticing he had said he lost the house. "A studio apartment downtown. It is all I can afford while the legal issues play out." Most of our assets are frozen. I had to sell my car, my watches, everything of value. He gave a humorless laugh. I keep thinking about how you managed when Dad left, with even less than I have now, and with a child to support. It was hard, I acknowledged, but not impossible. You learn what truly matters when options are limited. Timothy reached across the table tentatively. Could we maybe talk again sometime? I understand if you need time. I considered his request, weighing my own healing against his clear need. We can talk, Timothy, but things cannot go back to how they were. I have built a different life now, one where I value myself too much to accept disrespect, even from my son. Relief washed over his face. That is fair. More than fair. As our coffee ended, I made my boundaries clear. I would not financially bail him out of problems created by his own choices. I would not invite him to live with me while he sorted out his legal troubles. But I would listen, offer emotional support, and share the wisdom gained through my own difficulties, if he was genuinely interested in hearing it. You will get through this, I told him as we parted. Not by taking shortcuts or manipulating others, but by facing consequences honestly and rebuilding with integrity. He looked at me with something like wonder. When did you get so wise, Mom? I have always been wise, Timothy. You just stopped listening. In the weeks that followed, we established a cautious new pattern. Sunday afternoon phone calls. Occasional simple meals at my home. Timothy seemed humbled by his circumstances, more receptive to perspectives he would have dismissed months earlier. He asked questions about my teaching assistant work and actually listened to the answers, expressing genuine surprise at how fulfilling I found it. The legal consequences for his business practices continued to unfold, resulting in substantial fines and a settlement that required years of repayment. He avoided jail time by cooperating fully with investigators and accepting responsibility, but his reputation in the business world was destroyed. At 39, he was starting over completely, working an entry-level position at a small marketing firm, his previous success now a cautionary tale in business ethics seminars. The material trappings of his former life, the luxury cars and vacation properties, the designer wardrobe and exclusive club memberships, all disappeared. In their place came something unexpected, a slowly developing authenticity I had not seen in him since childhood. The irony was not lost on either of us. Timothy had thrown $50 at me, telling me to make my own money and stop leeching off him. Now I was the one with stable employment and a modest but sufficient income, while he struggled to pay rent on his studio apartment. But I took no pleasure in his reversal of fortune, only hoped that from these painful lessons, a better man might emerge. A full year passed after that fateful Christmas Eve. December arrived again, bringing with it unavoidable reflections on how dramatically our lives had changed. I was now 69, working part-time at both the elementary school and the hospital, finding fulfillment in both roles. My circle of friends had expanded, my health had improved with regular exercise, and my modest home had become a true reflection of my personality, filled with books, colorful throws, and small treasures from local art fairs. Timothy, now 40, had spent the year rebuilding his life from scratch. The legal issues surrounding Apex Digital had been resolved with significant financial penalties, but no jail time. He continued at the entry-level marketing position, earning a fraction of his former salary, but approaching the work with unexpected humility and diligence. His studio apartment was sparsely furnished, most of his possessions sold to pay legal fees and settlements. Our relationship had evolved through careful, intentional steps. The Sunday phone calls became Sunday dinners at my home, simple meals where we gradually relearned how to talk to each other. There were difficult conversations where I expressed years of hurt feelings, and Timothy acknowledged his selfishness and snobbery. There were awkward silences and occasional retreats to safer topics when emotions ran too high. But there were also moments of genuine connection, glimpses of the bond we had shared during his childhood before success and status became his priorities. He helped me set up my first smartphone, patiently explaining features without the condescension that would have characterized his assistants in the past. I shared stories from my teaching assistant work, and he seemed genuinely interested in the children's progress and challenges. As Christmas approached, I felt apprehensive about how we would navigate the holiday that had marked our painful rupture. Timothy raised the subject during a Sunday dinner in early December. I was thinking, he said carefully, pushing pasta around his plate, about Christmas this year. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Would it be okay if we spent it here? Just the two of us? Nothing fancy, just I do not know being together without all the pressure. The request touched me deeply. I would like that very much, I replied. And Mom, he added. I know it cannot make up for last year, but I want to do things differently now. On Christmas Eve, Timothy arrived at my home carrying a small bag of groceries and one carefully wrapped package. Together we prepared a simple meal, laughing over his clumsy attempts to chop vegetables and my outdated spice collection. There was an ease between us that had been missing for years, a comfort in shared tasks and conversation. After dinner, we exchanged gifts in my living room. Beside the small artificial tree I had decorated with ornaments collected over decades, many handmade by Timothy in elementary school. I gave him a leather-bound journal, explaining that writing had helped me process my feelings during our estrangement. Sometimes putting thoughts on paper helps make sense of them, I said. Timothy handed me his package with uncharacteristic nervousness. Inside was a framed photograph I had never seen before. Timothy at about age 7 sitting on my lap, both of us laughing at something off camera. Along with it was a handwritten letter, several pages long. You do not have to read it now, he said quickly. It is just there were things I needed to say properly, about how much I regret the way I treated you, and how grateful I am for everything you sacrificed for me. I held the frame carefully, remembering that carefree young mother who had no idea what challenges lay ahead. We both made mistakes, Timothy. Me in always putting your needs above my own, teaching you that my value came only from what I could give you. You in believing that success and status were worth more than genuine connection. He nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. I have been thinking a lot about Dad leaving, how it shaped both of us. You became determined to compensate for his absence, and I became obsessed with never being vulnerable like you were when he left. This insight surprised me. We had rarely discussed Richard's abandonment and its impact beyond the practical challenges it created. That makes sense, I acknowledged. I was so focused on providing material security that I may have missed teaching you about emotional security. I met with a therapist after everything fell apart, Timothy admitted. He helped me see patterns I had never recognized before, how I associated money and status with safety, how terrified I was of ending up struggling like we did when I was young. Fear is a powerful motivator, I said softly, for both of us. As the evening progressed, our conversation deepened, exploring wounds and misunderstandings that had festered for years. There were difficult moments of accountability, Timothy acknowledging how he had exploited my maternal devotion, while simultaneously resenting it. I admitted my own role in our dysfunctional dynamic, how my identity had become so entangled with his success that I had enabled his entitled behavior. I never wanted you to feel responsible for my happiness, I told him. That was too heavy a burden to place on you. And I never should have treated your sacrifices with such disrespect, he replied. You gave me opportunities Dad never would have, and instead of gratitude, I felt embarrassed by how you had to struggle. By the time midnight approached, something had shifted between us. Not a complete healing that would take much longer, but a foundation for a healthier relationship built on mutual respect, rather than obligation or expectation. The new year brought continued growth for both of us. Timothy received a small promotion at work, recognition of his genuine effort rather than the superficial charm that had once been his primary tool. I completed additional certification that allowed me to work with special needs children, finding particular fulfillment in helping students who struggled with traditional learning methods. Our Sunday dinners became a cherished ritual. Sometimes Barbara or Diane would join us, sometimes Timothy would bring a colleague or new friend. These gatherings were nothing like the elaborate, status-conscious dinner parties he had once hosted, but the conversation was richer, the laughter more genuine. Timothy began volunteering at a youth entrepreneurship program, teaching business basics to teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds. They remind me of myself before I lost my way, he told me. Smart and hungry for success, but needing guidance about doing it with integrity. In March, during one of our dinners, Timothy surprised me by asking for advice about a workplace ethical dilemma, something the old Timothy would never have done, believing his judgment superior to mine in all professional matters. "What would you do, Mom?" he asked sincerely. "You have always had a strong moral compass." The question moved me deeply, not because I had a perfect answer, but because it represented his recognition of my wisdom, something he had dismissed for so long. As spring bloomed into summer, our relationship continued its careful healing. There were still occasional missteps, moments when old patterns threatened to reemerge. Timothy sometimes slipped into materialistic thinking. I sometimes fell into martyrdom. But now we could recognize and gently correct these tendencies, committed to building something healthier. The most profound change was in Timothy's understanding of success. The man who had once judged worth entirely by financial achievement and social status now spoke about finding meaning in simpler pleasures, in authentic connections, in work that contributed positively to others' lives. "I used to think you settled for less because you had no choice," he told me during a walk in the park. "Now I realize you understood something fundamental about happiness that I missed completely: chasing external validation." My own transformation continued as well. The woman who had defined herself solely as Timothy's mother now embraced multiple identities: educator, friend, volunteer, community member. I learned to express my needs directly rather than martyring myself, and expecting others to notice my sacrifice. I discovered joy in creative pursuits abandoned decades earlier, joining a community choir and taking up watercolor painting. As another Christmas approached, bringing with it the anniversary of both our painful rupture and the beginning of our reconciliation, Timothy and I planned a small gathering at my home, inviting the people who had supported both of us through difficult times. Barbara and Diane would be there, along with colleagues Timothy had grown close to at his new job and several friends from my teaching work. 2 days before the gathering, Timothy called with an unexpected request. "Mom, would it be okay if I stayed with you for a few days over the holiday? My lease is up, and the new apartment will not be ready until January." "Of course," I replied, pleased by the prospect of extended time together. When he arrived with his suitcases, I noticed something different about him, a lightness that had been absent even during our reconciliation. After settling in, he joined me in the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. "I have some news," he said, pouring us both tea. "I have been offered a new position starting in February." "That is wonderful," I replied. "With another marketing firm?" "Actually, no. It is with a nonprofit that provides business training and microloans to single parents starting small businesses." His expression was serious but hopeful. "The salary is less than I am making now, but the work feels meaningful in a way nothing has since, well, everything fell apart." I studied my son's face, seeing in it echoes of the idealistic boy he had been before ambition and status anxiety took over. "You would be very good at that, Timothy. You understand both business principles and now, the challenges of starting over with limited resources." "I thought about you when they described the clients they serve," he admitted. "Single parents with dreams bigger than their current circumstances. Like you were, trying to create opportunities despite obstacles." The comparison touched me deeply. "I am proud of you for considering it. Not the prestige or the salary, but the impact you could have." "I already accepted," he said with a small smile. "I start February 1st. As we prepared for our Christmas gathering, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From the humiliation of having money thrown at me by my own son to the deep satisfaction of seeing him evolve into a man of character and compassion. From my own identity crisis to discovering strengths and passions I never knew I possessed." The Christmas Eve gathering was nothing like the status-conscious event at Timothy's former home. My modest living room was crowded with people of diverse backgrounds and ages, enjoying simple food and genuine conversation. Timothy moved among them with natural ease, no longer performing success, but simply being present. At one point, I found myself in the kitchen with Barbara, watching through the doorway as Timothy showed Eleanor's grandson how to play a card game. "Who would have thought," Barbara mused, "that losing everything would be the best thing that ever happened to him?" "Sometimes we need to hit bottom before we can rebuild on a stronger foundation," I replied. For both of us, the breaking point was also the turning point. Later, As guests were leaving, Timothy helped me gather dishes in the kitchen. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For hosting? It was my pleasure." "No, for not giving up on me. For setting boundaries instead of cutting me off completely. I would have understood if you had, after how I treated you." I paused, considering his words. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be mistreated. Took me too long to learn that. But it also does not mean abandoning someone capable of growth and change. I am still learning, Mom. Still making mistakes. We all are, I assured him. That is the secret no one tells you about aging, that we never really figure everything out, we just get better at accepting our imperfections and learning from our failures. As I prepare to end my story, I want to share the most valuable lesson from this painful, but ultimately redemptive experience. True worth comes not from what we own or achieve in worldly terms, but from the integrity with which we live, the compassion we show others, and the courage to begin again when we lose our way. For those of you watching who might be struggling with painful family relationships or recovering from betrayal, I hope my journey offers some comfort. Healing is possible, though it requires both boundaries and forgiveness, the willingness to hold others accountable, while still offering them the chance to grow. And for those who, like my former self, have built their entire identity around serving others, remember that your value exists independent of what you do for anyone else. It is never too late to rediscover your own dreams and create a life that honors your needs alongside those you love. Have you ever experienced a relationship that needed to break before it could heal properly? Or discovered strength in yourself after a painful rejection? Please share your stories in the comments below. And do not forget to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys of growth and reconciliation. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as our most painful losses.